Our last speaker is Jim Smith. He's been an urban forester for 30 years. He's worked for the Forestry Commission and the Royal Parks, and he's currently Forestry Commission England's National Urban Forestry Advisor. He's been involved in the production of many national and regional guidance documents involving trees, and he's author of the Forestry Commission's guidance to local authorities on producing a comprehensive tree and woodland strategy. He's the current chair of the British Standards Institute Committee on the Standards for Trees. And he's going to talk a bit, I hope, about the need for trees in the city and the marrying of the complex needs of trees if they're going to survive and the infrastructure that we have in the city. So it's marrying sort of biology and engineering, if you like. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Camilla. I'd like to start today just by saying that if you told me, as the government's urban forestry advisor, that we'd have a government that was legislating at the moment for protecting street trees, I'd have said no, there's no way that's going to happen. But that is actually going forward. There's a consultation that's recently just finished on that, and there's been news about that in the future. But I'd like to just go one further than Robert in his date thing. Does anyone know when the first recorded law on tree protection was? And he gave us, well, it was the Babylonian king called Hammurabi. I think it was like 2000 BC. He had a code of law that fined someone 1 minar for felling a tree without the owner's permission. So that's over 3,000 years ago. But today I'm just going to talk about actually how we integrate trees into the highway, a really complex issue. In urban areas worldwide, tree planting and tree retention is almost always dictated by human development, whether that's existing development or proposed. So we're shoehorning trees in, or we're building around existing trees, and that's an issue, and we don't do it very well in this country. So the biggest issue for tree planting on new and existing highways is the future growth of the tree. And as already been mentioned, cities are artificial creations, but trees are living, breathing organisms that require the same basic needs as humans to thrive. Like us, they need space, they need air, they need water, and they need nutrients, food to grow properly. Unlike buildings, roads in particular, and urban infrastructure, they don't remain static. They grow, they change their state, and their needs and requirements alter over time. Very few other features of the urban realm are like that. Most green infrastructure, but trees on highways particularly. So, this document was produced in 2008 by DCLG, the Department for Communities and Local Government. And it highlighted, there was a survey of England's trees and towns, and it followed up an earlier project, an earlier document called Trees in Towns 1, that was done in the mid-1990s. This was produced in 2008. But the issues that are covered in this document are very much the same. And I'm sorry to say that the problems that we're dealing with highway trees and trees in general in urban areas is the same now as it was then. This document actually shows through the survey work that 22% of our urban trees are trees on highways, are trees on highways. The rest are in the other urban realm. So a fifth of the urban forest is actually located on our highways, our streets and highways. It also shows that about 70% of the land coverage, trees are on private owned land, and 30% are on public realm land, so highways as well. But what that means is, it also shows that a large proportion, the most significant public realm trees are the ones that provide us with the most ecosystem service benefits. The best trees are on highways and on the public realm, in our parks and open spaces. And why is that? Well, why are we having such trouble making sure that those trees are there? What that document says, that Trees in Towns 2 shows, is that we're actually losing, and one of the main tenets of the Trees and Design Action Group is we're losing those large landscape trees in our urban centres, and we're replacing them with smaller ones. And the problems we've got for the future in terms of climate change and climate adaptation is making sure that we increase canopy cover in our urban centres. And we're not doing very well at the moment due to a lack of integrated planning process, poorly specified PFI contracts, and the perceptions that large trees cause damage, whether that be direct or indirect, conflict with utilities, conflict with highway provision, and misinformation. That's something, a bit of a bugbear of mine. There's a lot of misinformation about trees at the moment, about what they do and what they provide, also the issues that they create. Other countries do this a lot better than us. This is Germany's an example of super German efficiency. It's in Frankfurt. You've got chevron parking with mature chestnut trees in between that. You've got a multi-use surface, a pedestrian surface and a cycleway, and you've got lamp columns, etc., set back from the tree. I would challenge anyone in the room today to find me a similar place in the UK where you can see that level of integration. We just don't see it. Similarly, south of France, this is Nice. You've got a median strip where they've planted trees. They've made space for those trees, albeit a different type of tree that we're used to in this country. But there's no stretch of the imagination to say that in the future this could be Brighton. So you need to consider what you're doing in the future. But they've actually created median strips where you can plant trees that will exist. We can do it. This is a place in North London, Parliament Hill. This photograph is taken from the London Development Plan 1951, and that's the same place today. That's just south of Parliament Hill near Kentish Town. So we can do it. This is a curbside build out in Crouch End. We do it in small ways, where probably because an individual has fought for a tree to be saved or something like that, or a local residents community group have done that. So it can happen, and we do it. We do it in small ways. This is just outside my house in North London. If you can just see there in the patch here, that little yellow circle, the local authority were in the process of changing their, renewing their lamp columns. And I saw the guy out there one day outside my house getting ready to put the paint on the ground. He was going to put a lamp column directly adjacent to the tree that I paid for and sponsored. So I just said to him, could you move it along the pavement a bit, please? And he was quite happy to do that. He was able to do that. But because the computer model that new lamp column renewal program was set on didn't recognise the locations of the trees, didn't even know the trees were there, they were prepared to put that lamp column directly next to the tree. So he moved that one. I was pleased I did that, but this is one just out round the corner. So what's going to happen is that tree, although the tree pre-existed the lamp column, the contractor just turned up and put the lamp column in there. And what will happen is that tree eventually will cause problems for the lux volumes of the light, and the tree will probably have to be removed. And what we need to do is to join up those two different departments within the local authorities. And this happens all over, this type of work. So what we need is, and a solution to this would be local authority tree and woodland strategies that are embedded in those other policies, the lighting, street lighting policies, highway provision policies. So there's pure, proper cross-departmental consensus on implementation. And if we're asking what my wish list would be, the strategic objectives of those policies would be that the urban forest should be perceived and strategically managed as a single resource covering the whole of an urban area, including its highway provision, and that tree and woodland strategy should be co-created and endorsed by the local highway authority. So you've got highway engineers talking closely and cooperating with tree officers. And as Robert has always mentioned, we need a new revision of Manual for Streets 2 detailing the possible engineering solutions. Now, Manual for Streets 1 was okay, but Manual for Streets 2 was okay. It was a big improvement on Manual for Streets 1, but it's now time to put some detail in there about detailing the possible engineering solutions to integrate trees into the highway. And I think Robert's gone a long way to explaining why that's necessary today. But there are situations where these examples are all over the country, and they're still being done by local authorities at the moment. This is flexible pit sizes. You've got tarmac inserts where the roots of the tree are causing deformity of the pavement. You've got narrow curb edgings. You've got irregular shaped pits, tree pits. You don't have to have one tree pit specified. You can have irregular pit sizes, and it's all down to how that contract is written. Tarmac inserts as well. And this surfacing here is a new material called rubber crumb paving, rubber crumb surfacing, which is actually water permeable and it's flexible, and it can be put in around a tree right up to the base, and it lets water permeable. It's water permeable. On big expanses, it actually creates a secondary benefit of having a suds situation. So that area there, that area of rubber crumb paving, is actually permeable, so if rainfall comes down, it creates more water availability to the tree that's there. So that's an engineering solution that can be put in place to ameliorate issues with footway problems or curb edges. You can do curbside build-outs. If a tree is causing a problem with access on the footway itself, you can lose a parking space and build out. You can do, as I said, other parts of the world in median strips. This is a location in North London, in Islington, Holloway Road. And when I was the planning tree officer there, it took me 2.5 years to persuade our highway engineers to let me do this, and another 2 years to get the permission of the Highways Agency, which is the local road authority, to plant those trees, and they're still there now. So it can be done, but it takes a lot of effort and a lot of coordination. This is Kingsway in London, again taken from the London Development Plan 1951 document, and it just shows that the plane trees that were planted there. And this is that same location today. The reason I show this slide is that the difference in time between this slide and this slide is about 50 years, 50 or 60 years, or about the same length of time that we have to prepare for the worst impacts of climate change. So if we're wanting to increase canopy cover, tree canopy cover in our cities, we need to do that now, and we need to get our act together by making sure that we get a cross-discipline approach. We also, in my view, we need someone who can, or a body or an organisation, someone who can communicate the issues of climate change and what we need to do in a strong way, someone who will be listened to. And some of you, those of you who are old enough to remember this chap, Ronald Reagan, he was known to be the great communicator. He was able to get a lot of information across to people in America and the rest of the world quite succinctly, because he presumably trained as an actor. But he was also guilty of some really howlers, some great howlers. And one of the ones that I remember mostly when I was a young tree surgeon is that trees cause more pollution than automobiles. That's a genuine quote from Ronald Reagan. And he was talking about air quality, trees impacting air quality. And I think we have a challenge in our urban areas at the moment, because there has been some research that mixes those issues up. And if you've got any questions about that at the end, I'll be more than happy to talk to you. Or come and talk to me on the TDAG stand, the Trees and Design Action Group stand. But the reason I've used those slides is that Ronald Reagan was also famous for another quote, and I'm going to think carefully about how I say this, that one of his other quotes was that there's nothing as good for the inside of a man as the outside of a horse. I'm just going to paraphrase that and say that there's nothing as good for the inside of a person as the outside of a tree. And it's incumbent on all of us in all the different disciplines to ensure that if we want to increase tree canopy cover and make trees the critical infrastructure on our highways in the future that they are, we need to work together to be able to do that. So thank you very much.